Welcome to another episode of Jewish Physicist Responds. Today we are going to be talking about, Bezras Hashem, two topics. One is going to be why do we not see miracles in the world around us? And the second question will be, why are there questions on the Jewish faith? Hashem could have created a world in which there were no questions on the Jewish faith. And so first I'll mention that one has to define what a miracle is, because many would say that it's a miracle that a child can survive within its mother's body without the ability to eat food, to drink water, to go outside and breathe air. And similarly, when a child gives birth, as Rabbi Akiva Tat speaks about, there's many things that have to happen all at the same time in just the right way in order that the birth is successful. And Hashem enables all of these things to happen right at the same time in the correct way. Similarly, a person's body has so many things that can go wrong, so many elements of it, and if one part of a person's body was not working properly, so a person would be unable to survive. And another miracle, perhaps, when we leave the restroom, so we thank Hashem that He, set all of our body parts in the correct way, and allowed everything to work, that we can be healthy. But another miracle there is that there's a physical body, and somehow a spiritual soul is able to rest in this physical body. So that's another kavanah, another intention we can have when we say the blessing after we leave the restroom. And I think we're going to address these questions in reverse order, and I think you'll see why by the end. So the first question that we're going to speak about is, why are there questions on the Jewish faith? So we spoke in a previous episode about agnosticism, and we spoke about the fact that there's no such thing as a neutral ideology. Even if a person would say that he has no ideology, well, from his actions, one could construct the ideology that's driving him to act in the way that he does. And as it happens to be, every ideology is something that a person can ask questions on. Meaning, there's no ideology in the whole world that a person cannot come up with good questions on. So you take 3,000 years, and you take a religion that many people are going to want to have questions on, right? Because Judaism it sets very strict moral requirements for the Jewish people, and also for the rest of the world. Hitler, he says, hated us in part because we were the world's conscience, right? A person and a nation and a kingdom, they don't want to be held accountable by anybody, and so a person doesn't want to feel guilty about anything, and so there's a natural instinct to try to find questions and make it so that a person's no longer bound by Jewish morality, and that is one reason that such a thing exists. Given all of these generations, certainly people are going to think of questions on Judaism where a person can think of many questions on any ideology, and quite quickly. And either in this episode or an episode shortly after, Emunah Hashem, we'll speak about questions on non-observant Jews, right? Like, what questions trouble non-observant Jews, at least in my experience. And there's a lot of questions on secular ideology that one can bring, and we'll speak about that as well. So there's another aspect here when we talk about why are there questions on the Jewish faith. So there's a very unique situation that we have as Jews, which is the systematic denial of Jewish history. This has happened throughout history. I'll give you several examples. So one is the denial of the Holocaust, right? And this is in the modern era, even in a generation where we have survivors still around, and we have tons of documented evidence with new technologies. So it turns out they did a study in the Economist very recently, and they found that between the ages of 18 and 29 in the United States, 20% believed that the Holocaust was a myth. This is not the percentage that believe that the Holocaust is exaggerated, because that number was larger. But the percentage that believe the Holocaust is a myth, in America, 18 to 29, this is This is 20%. In other nations, Europe, the Arab nations, it's much higher numbers. And the question is how, right? What is this trend? And we're going to talk about the historical context of this trend as well. And so it's very interesting because I looked through the different questions on the Holocaust that people ask. And I sorted them into categories. And similarly, I have a categorized list of the questions on Judaism that people have, questions on the Jewish faith. And as it turns out, these categories they exactly align, right? Like the categories on the categories of questions on the Holocaust, they fit very beautifully into the categories of questions on the Jewish faith. So what we learned from this very simple study is two things. One, that the nature of the questions does not necessarily tell us about their validity. And secondly, we see that the percentage of people who believe this, who believe that something is a myth, who believe that a historical reality is a myth, the percentage of people who believe it doesn't tell us anything, right? If half of the world believes the Holocaust is a myth, so it would seem that the number of people and also the education of the people, the educational level, that even if such people believe that it's a myth, that also does not tell us very much. In fact, the Southern Poverty Law Center speaks about Holocaust denial, and they explain that the way Holocaust deniers work in general is they're not dumb, right? It's not, and the people who believe it are not dumb in general. I'm sure also people who are stupid do also believe these things are myths, but they basically take different pieces of evidence and they try to create a certain story, and they say the Southern Poverty Law Center says that often they're very well read, they're very well educated, people who do this, and they go into all these different fields and they find a question based on this field and a question based on this field. And in the end, they present it to a person, and a person can be very impressed by it. A person, sees that, these are fields the person's not familiar with. And a person not knowing the fields and also not having the data points cannot respond immediately. There's no simple way for that person to have an answer to every question that this Holocaust denier just threw at him. The person can do research, and eventually, one question at a time, a person can build confidence, to address a couple questions. A person can develop a certain confidence to say, look, I've looked at two questions and the rest, I'm not so concerned to have to go down to a T and figure everything out. But this is sort of the way that it works. And I'll give you another example. So I spoke with a former colleague not too long ago. And we decided, he asked, he asked about my thoughts on the situation in Israel, and this is an Iranian colleague, and so I said, well, what do you think? So I let him speak, and he told me two things. They were two extraordinary myths that he sincerely believed, and this is someone with a PhD, and he's a smart person in general, and so he told me, one, that the 1,300 that were killed in the Hamas's massacre on Israel on October 7th, 2023. So this is a well-documented massacre, a terrible, tragic event. One of the worst since the Holocaust, if not the worst attack on the Jewish people since the Holocaust. And he told me that Hamas didn't kill anybody. I said, really? He said, it was the Israelis that killed the 1,300 people. So he said Hamas came and they only wanted to kidnap people, and then Israel came and they shot everybody. So I said, okay, how did that work? So he says there's a concept of a Hannibal protocol, and you can Wikipedia it, and there's a theoretical concept which some say it has existed in the Israeli military, some say it hasn't. There's no really documentation of it, but some want to say that after Gilad Shalit, Israel made a policy within their military that if there's military engagement and hostages taken, so supposedly either a person would either you would shoot the hostage or you would shoot the the enemy and not be so concerned about if you do shoot the hostage. And so this was this is something that's been just a kind of a theoretical thing. And there is an article from Haaretz, recording actually, where you had a retired military general, and all of this is going to come after the Palestinian Authority made the claim that Israel did the killing and Hamas didn't kill anybody. And so after that, Haaretz, the left-wing Israeli news journal, the one that very often incites against Orthodox Jews in a way that would not fly in America, and certainly in a workplace a person would get fired in a second for the kinds of articles they post. It's amazing that that becomes acceptable in certain environments. But so Haaretz published an article with this this guy on military reserve, and he said, look, I was in the military and we had this Hannibal protocol, or at least he seemed to think that it was something that was accepted. And he said, so he started to speculate. He said, well, what could you have had on October 7th? He said, maybe you'd have something like a mass Hannibal, and he used the word mass Hannibal, and he was speculating, right? There was no evidence that such a thing happened, but the news articles find out and they start publishing things, and all of a sudden there's apparently a large number of people who believe that Israel carried out this massacre. And so the friend of mine said, well, I have more evidence, right? You go to different fields and search around the internet and people can find pieces of evidence to support their challenge to to Jewish history. So he said there was an article also from Haaretz, and he said that there it says an unknown police officer said that it had seemed that there was at least one car that was being shot at by Israel. And so he said, well, why would they shoot at a car? So I told him, look, like the cars don't have, they don't have identification labels on them. Maybe they thought that it was only terrorists in that car, right? Maybe they thought it was only Hamas. And he said, well, why did Israel find burnt bodies, right? He said, so it must be that Israel bombed the houses, because otherwise how would you have burned bodies? So I told him, look, like arson is a well-known tactic for terrorism, and maybe they were burnt, right? Maybe Hamas burnt them. I mean, there's also olive oil in homes, it's a wonder that this person sincerely believed this, and it wasn't that he was coming from nothing. He had articles, right? And the second myth that he believed, that he told me, was that he thought that Israel went into Gaza in order to harvest Palestinian organs. And there's a Guardian article that speaks about this, right? These are fine news websites. They're respected, by society in general, these sorts of news websites. And it talks about it. It says, 30 years ago, there was supposedly some Israeli policy that allowed them to harvest organs from dead people in military environments, and including Israelis, but without permission. And it's they like to cite uncited people, right? But whether or not there was ever such a policy, and it's halakhically asur to believe these sorts of, in general, when a person reads the news, to really believe something. So there's a wonderful book that came out by Rav David Jaffe in Baltimore, and he explains that really a person is not allowed to just stam believe everything he reads on the news. A person has to have, a level of doubt with everything, because lashon hara, to accept lashon hara is not accepted in Judaism. A person's not allowed to accept gossip, to see it as truth. At most, a person can act in a hesitant way about things, to try to act smart. A person doesn't have to close his eyes and act stupid, right? So this is what this former colleague of mine told me. And he said, there was a person who apparently saw Israelis digging up bodies outside of the Gazan hospital. And so it's not clear whether that's true or not, right? Wartime people make up things. An individual can have many many different ideas, whether intentional or unintentional, can make things up. But suppose that such a thing would happen. So it could be that they were looking for the bodies of hostages to try to return them to Israel. So these are things where there's good answers, right? You could come up with a fine answer. You feel like you're just giving apologetics sometimes, right? Like I'm like, well, maybe this was this and this was this, and so a person feels a little uncomfortable with it. But this is exactly how they work. They find that a person starts to feel uncomfortable with the answers he's giving. I told them also, how many witnesses there were of what happened? 10,000 witnesses, I would guess. If there were 1,300 killed, say there's 10,000 witnesses. None of them said that Hamas was the one who did it, not Israel. You'd think something like that would have been told. The same thing with the 600,000 Jewish men who observed. The divine revelation at Sinai, which we'll speak about later, and we'll discuss some new approaches to this, Emir Hashem. So it's the same kind of thing. You say, well, how would they have faked such a thing? How would it have come about naturally? These are the sorts of things where they find people who want to deny Jewish history. They'll find spaces where there's limited information, in places of information sparsity is what you would call it, where there's only so much data, so a person is able to find things to cling on to and to find ways to attack Jewish history, and now I'll give some examples of the systematic denial of Jewish history. So when the United Nations has repeatedly denied the Jewish connection to the Temple Mount, despite the fact that we've dug up 2 temples, we have proof that there were temples, or at least a very strong archaeological case to say that 2 temples existed. And the Palestinians say that they were the Canaanites, right? DNA-wise, that's been disproven. But they make the claim. So then they say the Jews took the land from the Canaanites, and so originally it was the Palestinian land, right? So that, meaning before Israel was even created, is what they want to say. So that's a claim that's often peddled there. You have Ahmadinejad in Iran, and then you have the Abbas of the Palestinian Authority, and both of them are Holocaust deniers. It was actually Mahmoud Abbas's his PhD thesis, and this is the peace partner that that people are pushing Israel to work together with. That's the moderate, and so those are a couple examples. Also, the Christians say that the Jews had an old covenant, and Hashem withdrew this covenant, even though the Jewish perspective is that Hashem's covenant is eternal. And so our history of understanding that we're this chosen nation by Hashem and that doesn't change, so the Christians deny that. They also claim often that it was the Jews who killed Yashka, which I think has been debunked. The Black Israelites in America, this is a group of, I don't know if you're familiar with the Black Israelites. So they say that the Jews are not the real Jews. Really, the Jews are white people who have been pretending to be the Jews, and really they're the Jewish people. And similarly, in Islam, many believe that it really was not Yitzchak that Abraham sacrificed, but rather it was Yishmael. It was the person that they descend from, or at least that they spiritually descend from. A couple other examples, in Croatia, they're digging up Jewish remains. These are, these are trends that, you can't make it up. It's there really is a tremendous systematic denial of Jewish history, and the denial of the Jewish faith, meaning our faith is related to our history, right? We believe that the whole story is everything in the Torah. So the denial of the Jewish faith, which often happens by trying to deny Jewish history, that's actually usually the way people try to do it. So that is just a symptom of this general trend to try to deny Jewish history, and so we have to expect that this is something that we're going to see, And if a person's worried, why does Hashem make it that there are questions on the Jewish faith and on Jewish history? So you should say, why does Hashem make it such that there are questions on the Holocaust, right? And I think that that's the question that people are not going to be so concerned about because he's seated in front of our eyes, and people have free will, and Hashem gives people free will, and so a person expects, just physically, that there are going to be lots of questions on the Jewish faith after everything we've said. But it actually goes a little deeper, because Hashem really could have created a world where there were never questions on history or on the Jewish faith. And so we have to understand that there's three things that Hashem needs in the world to be concealed in order that we can have a free will. Right, the purpose of creation, it says in Nefesh HaChaim, when Hashem created the Jewish people, when Hashem created man in His image, this is all of mankind. We have to understand every person around us is created in God's image. People are not just resources to be used. Every person is something that has a life that one cannot calculate their value, and so. That Hashem created a person in God's image. So Nefesh HaChaim says it means Hashem gave a person a free will, just like Hashem can choose what He wants to do. So a person really can choose what he wants to do. And for a person really to have a free will, right? You need to have the opportunity in one moment to make free will choices, and also you need the range of free will, right? It's Hashem gives a person the choice to choose between life and death, right? It has to be for a person to get reward for choosing good. They also have to have the ability to choose things that are very bad. And so what we find is there are three realities in the world. One is that Hashem created the world. Two is that Hashem is actively involved and knows about what we're involved with. And a third thing is that Hashem is going to reward us for doing good things, and we're going to miss out and have bad things happen if we do bad things, and basically we're accountable for our actions. So we'll call this reality A, right? These three things, we'll call it reality A. So Hashem needs, reality A is true, but for a person to have free will, it must be that reality A comes forth in a hidden way, right? Hashem's presence, to be revealed, it has to be in a very hidden way, to the point that a person can forget about it, and then the person can sin, because it's like if a person is, at work and the boss is over his shoulder, or he's home and his parents are over his shoulder. Like when a person is afraid and a person knows that he's being held accountable and is 100% aware of that, so a person doesn't make a mistake. That's why Chazal say that a person only sins if he has a ruach shtus, if there's like a stupidity that enters his mind. Because if a person's totally aware of such a thing, the person's never going to sin. And secondly, a person has to have the full range of free will, right? So it can't be that there's ever a miracle that's gonna just totally prove to a person that Hashem exists. Because what's going to happen is, it could be now that the person at some point in his life is going to forget about it a little bit and he'll start acting up. But at some point the person's going to remember, look, I had this thing happen and I'm 100% sure that there's a Hashem in the world, and that all the, that reality A that we've mentioned is true. I'm going to be held accountable for my actions, and the person's going to change things around. The person's not going to descend to the worst possible point, because at some point he's going to realize what he's doing, right? And so Hashem has to allow for there to be the full range of free will. And that means that you can't have just like a big miracle that's gonna show us that Hashem's in the world 100%. There's no way to deny it, right? Like Hashem makes a world where people can deny Him, both at individual moments and also in their whole life, in the way that they act. So we've now spoken about why there are questions on the Jewish faith and why there have to be questions on the Jewish faith, right? Meaning that if there's no questions, so then there is no free will, right? There has to be, the question is the way that a person denies Hashem, right? Like either a person's certain or a person has a question. So there have to be these questions. I hope that's clear. And now we'll speak a little bit about why we don't see miracles a little bit more in this, this part 2 of this episode. And I hope either in this episode or shortly after, we're going to talk about what questions there are on other ideologies, on secular ideology, on non-observant Jews, and we'll also talk about some miracles that are miracles that really do allow free will that we have today. And that can really strengthen a person's Emunah. So thank you so much for listening to this first part. I want to just mention the source of the systematic denial of Jewish history. This is something that we have in the Torah itself. And it says, Torah simul lamonim. What happens in the Torah, we see it, throughout the rest of history. And we do see this. And indeed, another thing that can build a person's Emunah in Hashem, to see such a thing in the world against all odds, it would seem. And so what's the source? I'll give you a few of them. So look at Rashi on Bereshis. The first thing Rashi says on the whole Torah, he says, why did the Torah start with the creation of the world and not the first mitzvah? The Torah is coming lahoros, to teach us how to live as a Jew. And so why would it start not at the first mitzvah? It starts before. And Rashi says it's because someday the world is going to come and they're going to say, look, Israel is not yours. You are conquerors. And we're gonna be able to respond that that Hashem created the world, and if He wanted to give it to Abraham, He could. And similarly, we have a deed, from that Abraham purchased a cave in Eretz Yisrael, these are just historical things that people, Rashi says, are going to deny. And this was in the 1200s when he said this. And similarly, we see that by Yaakov and Lavan. So Yaakov went to stay with Lavan for a while, and Lavan tricked him many times. Yaakov says 100 times. And when Yaakov leaves, so Lavan tracks him down and says, "How could you do this to me? You just left in the middle of the night. You didn't let me kiss my children." He tells Yaakov how he's this trickster and this terrible person. And we understand that that's not what happened in Jewish history. Really, Yaakov was right the whole time. But he just wanted to label Yaakov as a liar. Yaakov is the father of the Jews. People want to call the Jews, liars and all sorts of things. And we have to understand that Jewish history is something that's going to be denied. And just finally, Avimelech with Abraham, he said, why do you do this to me when you came with your wife Sarah and you said that it's your sister? And Avimelech says, I was innocent. He says, presumably Abraham was guilty. And we understand Abraham did the right thing. There was not a choice. And so I think just with that, we should expect that there are going to be instances of systematic denial of the Jewish people, as we see. And it's a amazing and irrational thing that it is so common. So with that, we will continue in the next part.